Exactly. Okay, we are good to go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in today. I am here once again with the lovely Tina Foster, a incredible author and lawyer. She has been with us in the PID community, probably one of the lead researchers. She's been around for the last 12 years, going deep, very deep into the Paul McCartney is Dead conspiracy. She has written two books, which have been excellent reads. The first book that she wrote was called Splitting Image, Exposing the Secret World of Doubles, Decoys, and Imposter Replacements. And she has just released a current book, which is called Plastic Macca, The Secret Death and Replacement of Beatle Paul McCartney. This book came out early this year, so it is currently up to date with all the clues. There is so much out there that we can decipher and debunk, and we can look into this book for all the right pieces of information that we need in order to separate the truth from the fiction. So with this book, we can basically cut out all the crap, and if you look into this book, we can actually see that Paul McCartney really did die, and he was replaced by a guy that we don't really know who his name was, what his identity is, but there are certain sources out there that say that this guy has an identity beforehand, and that there was a backstory and whatnot, which we will cover in the show today. But I say that we're going to go very deep into some awesome topics today in regards to the Paul is Dead conspiracy. We might even go off topic. We never know. But so Tina, thank you very much for being here today. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Excellent.
So I was just talking to one of my lawyer friends, and when I first talked about it, Paul is dead with him several years ago, he admitted that he was dismissive of the topic. Yeah. But now he's read my book, Plastic Macca, and he believes there is an issue of material fact, whether Paul was replaced and whether this person who's pretending to be Paul is an imposter, and how many Falls there are. And he is now listening to the songs, and he can tell the difference between Paul's voice and Fall's voice. So I suggested to him that he go to YouTube and listen to the isolated vocals of Paul and Fall. Mm-hmm. Now, some isolated vocals of Fall are pretty funny. Like, if you listen to Revolution from the Smithers Brothers show from like 1968, Fall lets out this the goofiest howl in the beginning, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a rock and roll star right there. It's just like, oh my god, like,
is that so the Smothers Brothers one? That's obviously the one where they perform "Hey Jude." Does he do that before the song starts? Is that the one?
Revolution. Well, he does this like woo thing. I was like, oh god, but it
starts,
yeah, but the music kind of helps hide the goofiness of it. But if you listen to Isolated, it's like, wow, the dogs are gonna start howling, So anyway, and I listen to isolated vocals of Paul, and he sounds fine, regardless of what Memoirs claims that he didn't have a good voice. I mean, to me, it sounds great, and he doesn't need to have any distortion on his voice or anybody singing with him to make him sound good. And, Paul sang for the Queen, just him and a guitar on stage.
Yeah.
And has Fall ever been invited to sing for the Queen?
Not too sure.
Alone
on stage. I know that he was knighted, but I'm not too sure if he's ever performed just like to her.
Right.
Not 100% sure.
Oh, and that's something that I had in my book, because Fall said that he was nervous about singing or performing alone on stage, and he didn't really do it until, fairly recently.
Yeah.
And I did
Yeah.
put in the book, well, there was that time in Blackpool and that time on the Ed Sullivan Show, but I think I forgot the time he actually sang, or Paul sang for the Queen.
I know
That's
that I know that
that's pretty
for
nerve-wracking, right?
oh yeah. And he did
No
a great
pressure
job as
there.
always. Nah,
Yeah.
definitely not. Did a fantastic job. I know that for performed for Barry Sotero, aka Barry Obama.
Oh, and yes, Michelle. So he took Paul's song and then sang it to Michael, or I mean Michelle.
Yeah, oh sorry.
Yeah.
we gotta be gender specific. Come on. Come on. It's gender
We're
appropriate.
if nothing else, we're PC, right?
Exactly. Actually, did you see in that video? It's gone around where Four runs up the stage and he accidentally tips over the mic, and Stevie Wonder gets out his hand and actually manages to grab it, to catch it.
Oh, I missed that. But I
Have
did
you
see
seen
that
that?
I have seen that people are wondering whether Stevie Wonder is really blind or not.
Well, you should say, and even I think there's a video where one of the TMZ guys is recording him, and Stevie Wonder, for some reason, somehow, is signing autographs, and he looks up at the guy at the camera and says, "Are you filming this? You're recording this, aren't you? I can see it."
Oh, wow. What?
And of course, Paul and Stevie are very, very close friends, so
Oh
that
yeah,
doesn't surprise me.
they sing that classic Ebony and Ivory together. The
Oh,
most beautiful song ever.
that's the best song of all time. No, without a shadow of doubt.
Sarcasm, in case people think we're serious.
Nah, it didn't get to number 10, I think, on the worst songs of all time.
It's
I
gotta
think it
be
was.
It's plastic macaroni and cheese right there is what it is.
Yeah.
All right, so we had spent an hour and a half yesterday doing an interview, and now we are reprising it because the recording got messed up. So in case people
Yes.
are wondering why we're kind of a
Delayed.
little bit casual about this, because we've done it all before. So
Exactly. Consider it the Sergeant Pepper's of interviews. There's the original, and then there's the reprise.
it was a fake flash.
Awesome. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So what are we
Okay.
starting with? Are we starting with
We're going to start with memoirs, of course, because this book, just has separated the PID community down to a T. And basically, I just want to debug this book once and for all. And one of the most important things we have to talk about in regards to the book is the so-called fact that the Beatles did not write any of their music, that it was all mass manufactured. It was produced for them. They had nothing to do with it. They were basically just image puppets up on the stage, just doing their thing, and then that's it. So apparently the rumor going around, which has been circling the internet for a very long time, is that Theodore Adorno wrote the Beatles' music, and that John and Paul and even George had nothing to do with their music altogether. So, Tina, I know that you have some very strong views that the Beatles, that Theodore Adorno did not write the Beatles' music, even though he might have, I think he had owned the rights to it. But can you elaborate on why you think the Beatles did write their own music? I mean, it's obvious that they did, but why Theodore Adorno didn't write any of their music, and why Memoirs is pushing this narrative that they did.
Well, okay, so Dr. John Coleman, who was a former British Secret Service agent, made this claim in the Committee of 300 that Theodore Adorno wrote all the Beatles' music. And he did not provide any evidence or sources to back up this claim. And I guess it was based on the fact that he owned the Beatles' rights at one point, but that doesn't mean he wrote the songs, because Michael Jackson owned the rights to the Beatles later, and nobody's claiming that he wrote all the songs.
Yeah.
So there are a number of reasons why this is bunk. But okay, so one of them was that although the Beatles did cover songs such as Words of Love and Many and Twist and Shout, they did write their own songs, and they explained how they did it, in their interviews, like who wrote what. And when they were getting started, when they were first signed, George Martin wanted them to record a single. And he thought only Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You were commercially viable. And so he found a song, How Do You Do It? And it was by Mitch Murray.
Yeah.
And the Beatles did record it, but then they didn't want to release it because they wanted to do their own songs. Yeah. So the song eventually was recorded and released by Jerry and the Pacemakers, and they did have a hit with it. So right there is one instance where the Beatles turned down a song that was written by somebody else. Okay. Now, they did have a hit with Please Please Me, and the rest was history, right? And that was their own song. Well, then more evidence was provided by Walter Shenson, who was the producer for their movies, A Hard Day's Night and Help. And he personally saw matchbooks upon which John and Paul had written the lyrics for A Hard Day's Night. And so what was Theodore Adorno hanging out on scene and writing on matchbooks like the words to their songs? Yeah. And then so people have made a lot of to do about the fact that the Beatles didn't write their own, that they didn't know how to read or write music as proof that they didn't write their own songs. Well, of course they knew how to write. Well, they knew how to pick out songs. They knew chords. They could probably write tabs. And so they just had George Martin, whoever, transcribe the melodies that they came up with. Like, he would transcribe them into sheet music. Yeah. But then Paul actually was learning how to read and write music. He was taking lessons from a composer in 1966. So I didn't find too much on how much music he could read, but he could no doubt read some. And then also, so this song Yesterday that Paul supposedly wrote in a dream, which I think was repeated in memoirs, but Paul has said Yesterday was written in a dream. But Paul himself did talk about how he went through the process of coming up with the song and talking about how he would come up with different rhymes and how the song came together. So the dream stuff is bunk. And then, so other songs that Paul wrote himself, well, one was Paperback Writer. And Peter Frampton, when he was visiting with George Harrison in 1971, they were listening to Beatles songs, and Peter Frampton said, "Oh, I love what you did on Paperback Writer." And George said, "Oh, that's Paul." Yeah. Oh, and then Peter Frampton would say, "Oh, I like this song. I like what you did there. Oh, that's Paul." So if Theodore Adorno wrote everything, then why would George say that Paul wrote stuff in Paperback Writer and other songs? Like, why wouldn't he just say he did it? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then also Eleanor Rigby, which was another song that they said Paul did on his own. Well, it had a personal connection because it was the name on a gravestone in the St. Peter's Parish Church in Liverpool, where Paul and John would sunbathe. So how would Theodore Adorno have any knowledge of this, like this personal connection? Like, he's just hanging out. He's tailing them while they're sunbathing in Liverpool. Yeah. So then also another problem with the theory that Paul and John and George didn't write their own songs was that they would give songs to their friends. So during the Pacemakers, they gave Do You Want to Know a Secret? They gave Bads to Me to Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas. And they gave I Want to Be Your Man to the Rolling Stones. And then, of course, Peter and Gordon got A World Without Love and Woman. So why would, if Theodore Adorno is writing all the songs, then why would songs be given to these other artists and say they're by Lennon McCartney, but they're really not. See what I'm saying? It's like, why even bother? Like, why not even just say that the Rolling Stones wrote I Want to Be Your Man? You
Yeah.
know? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So that's a big problem with their logic there. And then also, another problem is that these university professors did a mathematical model to figure out who wrote which song, because Lennon and McCartney's songs were all under Lennon McCartney, even though one usually wrote it more than the other. Maybe there was some collaboration, maybe not. But whoever sang lead is usually who wrote the song. So, anyway, Mark Glickman, who was a statistician at Harvard, and Jason Brown, who was also a professor of math at Dalhousie University, they designed a computer model, and it broke down Lennon McCartney songs written between 1962 and 1966 into 149 different components. And the program would analyze frequency of chords, chord transitions, melodic notes, and pitch to determine who wrote which songs. And I think it's interesting that they looked at songs from 62 to 66, because I think they knew something was a little sketchy. But anyway, so these researchers noted that the pitch of Paul's songs was often complex and varied, while Lennon's were relatively static. So, for example, the song "Help," which was Lennon's, it was static. It didn't really change very much. It stays on the same note repeatedly and only changes in short steps. And Paul's song "Michelle" was all over the place in terms of pitch. So how would these scientists be able to tell which song was John's and which one was Paul's if the same person was writing all these songs?
Yeah.
So that doesn't make any sense either.
Yeah.
So, but the strongest evidence, in my opinion, is the fact that McCartney, and let's just pretend for a minute that he wrote all the songs. I mean, we know that it's, an imposter took over Paul's name. But just pretend for a minute that McCartney, like all the songs, like belong to the same person. So he actually was able to win back the rights to the Beatles catalog. Okay, so basically there was this, for decades, he was trying to get the song rights back. And he was using the U.S. Copyright Act of 1967, but of course it didn't apply in Britain, so it was harder for him to get the rights to. It was like 32 songs that were Lennon McCartney that, it was like Sony ATV ended up owning them, so he was trying to get these rights back. Yeah. Well, he actually got a settlement and he got the rights back. Yeah. And so if he had never written, obviously Paul wrote some of the songs and Paul wrote some of the songs, but they're just under the McCartney umbrella, okay? But if the songs had not been written by McCartney, then how would he ever get the rights? They would just say Theodore Adorno wrote them, like that he's the one who should have the rights. So like, no, this is not going to happen. Like Sony is not going to just settle with him unless he has a really good case, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that they wrote their own songs and really nothing to support that they didn't. And I don't know why this disinformation discrediting campaign is going on, but it's probably I think it's to discredit the Beatles and to take away from what they were trying to do. Mm-hmm. And also to dishearten people and think that really nothing good can ever spring up from just normal people. Like it has to be some elitist or Illuminati person who's behind it. Like there are people who are claiming Mozart didn't write his own songs. It's like, okay, well, and who was the genius who's writing these songs? It's like people really this is way overreaching in my opinion, but it also It's also not just to discredit the Beatles and to make it seem unimportant whatever happened to Paul, because if he's not talented, if he's just some performing monkey, then who cares if it's Paul or somebody like whoever could play that role. So people won't care what happened to him. That's part of it, in my opinion. But also, I think it discredits the Paul is dead theory in general. So if somebody is just a normal person, comes across the research, and then there are these people saying, "Oh, the Beatles didn't write their own music." Well, that person's going to say, "Well, this is bad. Like, these people are totally ignorant and uneducated, don't know anything about the Beatles, and
Yeah,
they're just gonna just turn it off. They're just gonna say, well, this is stupid."
yeah,
So, and also, like, I mean, it's kind of like the flat Earth stuff. I'm now associated with flat Earth because I'm a Paul's dead researcher, which they have nothing to do with each other, and I've never once said I believe in flat Earth.
yeah,
But it discredits the whole research
yeah,
because it's just it's dumb, and that you're associated with it because other people say it who are in the same field of
yeah, yeah.
research. So anyway, that's
Well, yeah, no, that's the thing, and you pretty much nailed it right there in terms of, and first of all, Mozart did not write his music; it was his imposter, Mozart, and also Beethoven didn't; it was also his imposter, Beethoven. So I just want to clear that up because I know there's going to be a lot of confusion on here, so I just want to
fuck.
make okay, yeah, exactly, fuck as well, fucking hell. Nah, but yeah, no. Look, the whole idea, and especially I know that you brought out a video yesterday, on your Plastic Macca YouTube channel, which basically goes over what you just gone over just then, saying that in terms of the song yesterday, which I know that we discussed in our previous conversation that. Paul McCartney was just basically mulling over the tune. He didn't really know how the melody could come about, so he started rhyming some words together, like yesterday, today, away, say, bay, day, whatever, and then he'd say suddenly, merrily, and he sort of make sure that the words would sort of just come together, and he'd have this tune prepared in his head, and then he'd start writing it and putting it together. So it kind of, if that's coming straight out of the horse's mouth, the guy that is actually writing the song, why would we listen to the imposter who's telling a completely different story, that he's written this song in a dream and he just went to the piano and all of a sudden he just wrote the song and bam, he's got one of the best songs of all time and one of the most covered songs of all time and whatnot. So it makes me think that, well, I think Four's just using that as a cover up because we know that he could never write a song as good as yesterday. Now I know that there could be people out there that'll say, well, what about Hey Jude or Let It Be? Hey Jude is in most cases, or at least in the, I think, Rolling Stone 500 greatest songs of all time. It's actually number 7, while yesterday's number 13. A lot of people say Let It Be is better than yesterday. So I know that there are a couple of debates and issues in regards to that. But when it comes down to it, yesterday is a 2-minute song that packs everything that you ever need into a ballad, into that couple of minutes. So I think Four is just using his. I think he's just jealous at the fact that he could never write a song like that. And it's the same as Eleanor Rigby. As you said, Paul. That was Paul on his own, and he's not a team player, so he's obviously going to write music which is very much of a very, very high standard. And I think Four has tried to do that, but it sort of comes up as a bit cheesy. It's a bit sort of cringy in terms of, songs like When I'm 64 or Your Mother Should Know, or it just kind of sounds like he's trying to he's trying to use that sort of classical music, the classical influence, and put it in pop songs, but it just doesn't have that same intensity that a song like Eleanor Rigby would, which is 2 minutes of John and Paul, standing around in the cemetery and near the tomb sites and that, and they've seen the tombstone of who was it again? Sorry, John.
Eleanor Rigby.
Yeah, it was an Eleanor Rigby tombstone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were basically just hanging around there, and then Paul would remember that he'd write the song and whatnot. So it just makes you think, well, this guy is basically rewriting Beatles history, and with the help of a couple of people that are sort of perpetuating this myth, they're just going to turn it into reality. Now, this is very scary because if people who decide to get into this go towards that narrative first, they're not going to go towards the fact that the real story of what had happened. Now, we've only got, I don't know, 3-4 months less maybe of recorded documents and interviews saying stuff about Eleanor Rigby of the original Beatles, saying stuff that Paul had written Eleanor Rigby on his own or whatever. And yesterday they only probably had a year and a half or so that they could talk about it, whereas Paul had 53, 54 years of perfecting his story. So the more that he repeats the lie, the more that it becomes a truth. Yes. And I think that now people just say, okay, well, yesterday was made up in a dream, and it was just it just came out of nowhere, and the song was made out of nothing. So, and I'm not too sure if it's actually on Wikipedia. I'm not too sure if they're going with that narrative or if they're going with the real narrative of what we were talking about with Paul mulling over the tune. So, so just little things like that is what sort of makes the whole Paul is dead conspiracy it muddies the waters. So I think that now, with your book out, it just contradicts a lot of, in a good way, a lot of the stuff that Memoirs is talking about, because I think the more that we can say, all right, well, we need to separate the facts from the fiction, then we'll get it right. So, Tina, I know that, with Memoirs, it does talk a lot about a lot of deep occultic stuff, and it goes very much into Freemasonic and numerology and all the sort of underground stuff. There's also one thing that came out that said that the Beatles were manufactured from the start, that they were devil worshippers, that they were in the Illuminati, and basically they did rituals and sacrifices and all that stuff to sort of get to where they had to be. So, Tina, what do you think of that? And do you think it's true, or do you think it's very much false?
No, I think it's completely false. I mean, where's the proof? There is no proof. He's just making stuff up. I mean, the author just went through the PID forums. So people think because they only recently got into Paul is dead research, they think there wasn't anything out on the forums 10 or so years ago. But I can tell you, there was a lot of stuff out there, and people were making claims, or at least just talking about different possibilities. And, one thing was the 60th document that came out in 2002.
Yeah.
And I know Memoirs got the bit about how the Beatles went to India to put Paul's spirit into Paul's body. Like, that's straight out of 60th. Yeah. And of course, it's just a made-up story. Like, it doesn't have any bearing on reality, but people believe these things without any proof or anything. But so it doesn't make any sense that the Beatles would have been manufactured by Tavistock from the beginning, and that's part of the claim that they didn't write any of their own songs. So that can be just done away with. I mean, hopefully that'll be laid to rest. But So anybody who can see the Beatles and hear the music and how positive and upbeat it was and how people responded so positively to them. Like, it doesn't make any sense that they were on the dark side. They absolutely were not. And that was the problem, because they were not going to go to the dark side. They were not part of the agenda, and they had to be dealt with. So at least Paul had to be removed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's for the band to be hijacked, and to that's when you see the pushing of the agenda.
Oh,
Before that, Paul, John, all of them were speaking out against the Vietnam War. They were against segregation. They were going up against the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul was a conspiracy theorist, talking about the JFK assassination, not believing the official story.
Yep.
So these things do not jibe with the claim that they were controlled from the beginning. It's like after Paul is removed is when you see them going and being a Tavistock band, okay, pushing the drug agenda, Paul being the first one to talk about LSD and being very proud of it.
Yeah.
And all that, but not before that. So this is the Paul being removed is the transition point.
Yeah.
So people just want to, make a buck off of just disparaging the Beatles. And, if they're Beatle haters and they're going to be talking trash about my boys, they're going to have to expect some pushback,
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah. No, well, that's the thing, Tina. Like, yeah, even in the '66 tour, I mean, they still had their wits about them. I mean, they were not going to lose any of their charm and their popularity and their humor and everything else just because some controversy has come up. They handled it really well. I mean, John said, I clarified every time. If I'd said that television was popular than Jesus, then I might have got away with it. But he happened to say that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. And look, I understand where he's coming from at the time, because the Beatles were it. They were everything. They embodied everything that was good about the culture at that time and what was going to be bad about the culture at that time. They were, spearheading the '60s cultural revolution into overdrive, and in the space of about 4 years, they had gone from basically just Merseyside singers to world beaters. They would basically, if they could convince many millions of young people of what their beliefs were, in terms of going against the Vietnam War and questioning the JFK assassination and other little like conspiracies that would come up over time, the people would definitely be interested, and they would start questioning it and they would start opposing the war. And I don't even know if Paul was alive. I mean, would there have been such a big countercultural movement towards LSD and psychedelic drugs and all that stuff? Would there have been such a big movement towards it? Because I know that Paul hadn't tried LSD. He may have tried it before he died. I'm not too sure, but
I don't
did,
think so.
Because I know that they did say that. I think George said in the anthology, he said, "Oh, we've been trying to get Paul to do it for 18 months," and then all of a sudden, he's talking about it on TV, saying that he's done it 4 times. So
That's
I
right.
think I'm pretty sure that Paul hadn't done it, because I know that for someone like him, he's a very restless guy. He seems to me like he's got that nervous energy in a way that he has to always be doing something. So if he was to be dropping acid, I don't think he'd be able to sit still. I think he'd be very, very much, he'd be very scared. So I think he wouldn't want to do anything that was out of his comfort zone. So he might have smoked weed. I mean, that wouldn't surprise me if he did. But Paul was just one of those sort of straight up guys. He probably smoked cigarettes and drank alcohol and whatnot. But he was never someone who was into mind expanding drugs. His idea of expanding his mind was through his music, and that's why he was listening to. That's why he was listening to all the composers and taking lessons and whatnot, because he wanted to expand his mind through there. And John was probably more of the rebellious type. He was more into the drugs and whatnot, but he was still at that time, especially in '66. He was very much still, with Paul. Him and Paul were very much the definitive collaboration between each other. So I think they pushed that agenda. They made it more. They made the agenda more relevant, because they got rid of Paul, they hijacked the movement, and they became the new Beatles after that. Whether all the other Beatles were replaced, and I'm not too sure. I do think that John may have been replaced, because he just looks very, very different within the space of a year. So there's definitely big claims that he could be replaced. I have no doubt about that. But yeah, so even also with, did you want to say something before we?
Well, I just wanted to mention with the LSD that Peter Asher, he died fairly recently, and there was an interview when he was talking about that time he got high on LSD with the Beatles, and he said except Paul.
Yeah.
So they were all tripping except Paul, and so. I don't think Paul ever did anything like that. Like, I put in the book about how the director Richard Lester, for Help, when they were on the set, he actually personally witnessed these women trying to get Paul to try heroin, and he just wasn't having any of it.
Yeah.
And so he just wasn't the type. Like, he was kind of straight-laced and very intellectual. Like, I don't think he had the need to try to, like, his mind was already very active and he was already really smart and intellectual, so I just don't think he felt the need for that. Maybe he was worried what it would do to his creativity.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly right. And I think that once 4 came in within the space of 4 months, 5 months, whatever it was, he comes in and says that he's taken LSD 4 times, and it's just like, well, hang on a second, like, how can you just come out and just say that once and for all? I mean, he had every right to tell those press guys to go away. I think that was probably scripted. I think he was just, they said, all right, well, you just tell the world that you've taken LSD 4 times. You're not even this guy. You can pretty much say what you want to say. And, people will believe that. People will say, oh, okay, well, if my favorite Beatle has taken LSD, then I'm going to take LSD, and I'm going to smoke weed, and I'm going to take drugs, and be rebellious and whatnot. So it's pretty incredible how much the culture changed after they got rid of Paul. I mean, it was a big shift in terms of mass consciousness. Consciousness had
Yeah, no, I made a mistake because I said Peter Asher, but I meant Peter Fonda. But
Fonda,
everything changed from 66 to 67. That was a huge shift in the counterculture, in the drug scene, and the assault on traditional values and the family. And I think we talked about that last time with the Nicholas Rockefeller and Aaron Russo, how the agenda was to get the feminist agenda was to get women to work so that women could be taxed equally, but also to get the children indoctrinated sooner, at an earlier age.
Yeah, and we're seeing that now.
Yeah, we're seeing it for sure. Yeah. So anyway, it was Peter Fonda, not Peter Asher. I'm sure he probably got high with them too. Who knows? But
wouldn't surprise me.
And you thought it was contrived, and Fall did say that he knew what would happen if he talked about taking LSD. Like, he knew a lot of people would try it, and this is not, eating marshmallows. I mean, this is a psychochemical warfare agent.
Yeah.
This is some serious heavy duty drugs, and you can actually have a psychotic break from just one acid trip.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
it's a gamble. I mean, can you pass the acid test? I mean, what if you
Yeah.
can't? What if you end up like Sid Barrett? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Well,
not.
I've done acid before. I did it once, and it just didn't really do anything for me. You know, it's because I'm sort of the same as Paul. Like in terms of I have an active mind, and I'm always thinking about stuff. And I feel that if I do have like a psychedelic agent or some sort of chemical to be induced into my brain like that, it would just ruin everything. Um, over a long period of time. So I took it once, wasn't good at all. And like Paul, I'm left-handed, so but it just made me think that having something like that for the wrong person, the wrong type of person, it will just destroy their brain capacity forever. And I think if Paul was to take it, especially if it was a high dose as well, it would just ruin it. It may give him some insights into the sort of everything that's beyond the physical realms on this world. But I think for someone like Paul, like you said, he's very straight laced, he's classy, he's elegant, sort of has that royal look about him. So why would he give all that up just so he could expand his mind, not naturally, but through some sort of chemical agent. So yeah, I think that Paul just didn't really want anything to do with it. And then this new guy comes in and just says, all right, well, if you want me to talk about acid, even though I've probably never done it, I'll do it. I don't care. That's what it probably was. If whatever his handlers tell him to do, he probably did it at first. So I think over time, the more confident that he got in playing the role, the more that he sort of just he was more able to sort of be his own version of Paul McCartney. Not that it was any good, but he started to sort of just be comfortable in it. So yeah, I think that the whole psychedelic movement was basically just a farce in the end. But Tina, I just want to go back to the memoirs and talk
Mhm.
about She's Leaving Home, because I know that's one of the main clues in the whole PID circles. When you get introduced to it, basically one of the first things that people say is in the Sgt. Pepper's back cover is George Harrison pointing up to the lyrics Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock. Now, Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock is obviously a mention or a reference to Paul McCartney's supposed death on September the 11th, where he died in a car crash. And then there was the news story that came out that one of the Beatles had died in a car crash. I think it was September the 11th or September 12th. And that was at about 9 o'clock p.m. And then 11 o'clock p.m. they said that there was nothing. That basically it was just a rumor. The story had been quashed. There was nothing at all. So no one really just thought about it. So whether or not they decided to play on it, in the song She's Leaving Home, it says Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins. That is a reference to the papers. That Paul McCartney was officially pronounced dead at 5 a.m. on Wednesday. So if that's the case, okay, it might be a good rumor. It might be a good clue, sorry, to put into the PID circles. But Dr. Henry Truby in 1969, 1970 came out with the voice prints saying that Paul McCartney had saying She's Leaving Home. So if the original Paul McCartney had saying She's Leaving Home, he obviously recorded it before his death. Now, why would Paul McCartney write a song talking about his upcoming death and putting it as a clue into the next album about something that he...
Well, he didn't, obviously. Can you hear me? Or did we drop off? I think we dropped off. Hello? Oh, I think it dropped. It dropped off. You're back now. Okay, let's cut that part
Okay,
off.
did you hear?
Hello? Oh no. Turn off your video.
So no, that's good. I like.
Turn off your video.
So I can hear you.
Okay. Try your video though. It might be part of the problem.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can. You're really breaking up.
Can you hear me though? Okay.
Yeah, that's better. Wait, try that. Are you there?
There we go. Can you
Yeah,
hear
that's
me now? Yep,
okay.
I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, let's cut that
Okay,
part
all good.
before you post it. Okay, so you were asking about she's leaving home. Well, look, here's the deal. So back in '69, when people found out that something was amiss with Paul, they didn't know. There was no internet. They just started looking at album covers and songs, and they were trying to find out clues to try to piece together what happened to Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So they saw, this was '69. So they, were looking back. I guess they knew Paul. I'm not sure if they knew when he had been replaced exactly, but they knew he had been replaced by '69. So they were looking back at the clues and they saw she was leaving home and they're like, oh, well, that's a time of death, right? And of course, Fred LeBour could have made this up too because he did make up a lot of the supposed clues in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
So they were just looking at things like that. Okay, so there's the three Beatles or the three dots on the back of Abbey Road, which is the three Beatles,
Yeah.
and the blue dress, which is like Jane Asher supposedly, and of course Sergeant Pepper has tons of clues on it.
Yeah.
And the drum kit too, which says 119 he died.
Yeah.
That's also, supposedly it was September 11th or November 9th when he died. But it doesn't mean that that's the date of death. And I think Tony Nowhere Man just posted a video about how that could be actually the death of Aleister Crowley. It was 20 years ago today. And he did die on September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it could just be, look, 11X, like one of the Beatles is X'd out. Like, it doesn't mean that that's a clue about the date of death. Okay, anyway, and I think that Paul died before September 11th.
Yeah.
So, like, when you have, and I think a lot of clues people overreach a lot,
Yeah.
especially when they're going to other songs by other artists, and it just gets to be like, well, not everything is a Paul is dead clue, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we know that She's Leaving Home was sung by Paul because of the voice prints. So they had it. They had it in the can whenever he disappeared, they just pulled it out and put it on the album to make it seem like Paul was still around. But they were probably also desperate for material from Paul. And I think that's probably why they recorded When I'm 64, because Paul wrote that when he was 15. And
Yeah.
he may never have actually recorded that song. We don't know. Or if he did, then it may have been different. But he probably wouldn't have because he probably wrote a lot and he didn't put it on anything before that.
Yeah.
He probably had newer songs he wanted to play or to record. And I kind of feel like One After 909 is like that too because it was a John song, and Paul
Yeah.
tried to, Paul tried to claim credit for writing some of it, but it was supposedly all John's. And they put it on Let It Be, but it was a really early song, so they're reaching back like, oh my God, we really need songs here. Why did they need songs? And even Ringo said that by the time Abbey Road came along, the writers were not finishing songs. And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what does that mean, really? Why
Well,
weren't
well,
they finishing songs?
well, isn't Golden Slumbers? That was just basically a rip off of Rocky Raccoon. So, Paul is basically just copying his own tunes at the end of the day. I mean,
And-
yeah,
yeah,
if you can't even, if he's so desperate to write songs, why would he copy his own songs? I mean, that's just if you're a great songwriter, you should have ideas flowing through your mind all the time. And if you're going to copy your own songs, then you're not really a great songwriter. It's the same as when I'm 64, and you're spot on when you said that. Paul probably just put it away because he didn't really think about it. Maybe he might have written it later on, but he didn't really have any time for that song. And I've listened to the isolated vocals. I've slowed down the songs as well, and that's four. That whole voice is just four. It just sounds so flat.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. No, I'm sure Paul did sing it, but it could have been something that Paul had recorded or just written the notes for, the chords for.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that happened in a lot of cases.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, and we discussed the songwriting talents before in our last conversation when we spoke about the quality versus quantity. I mean, as we said, Paul wrote songs that are just, they'll be around for millennia in terms of how good they are, in terms of Here, There, and Everywhere, Eleanor Rigby yesterday. I saw her standing there, and I love her. I'll follow the sun for no one. Just genius songs, right? But then, Paul on the other hand, he just released a lot of just trash that was just on the album because he thought it was good. I'm sure John Lennon didn't think that any of his songs were good, mate. I think he said that. I'm pretty sure he said "Hey Jude" was one of the songs that he really liked. He said, and he did say that was Paul's masterpiece, but he didn't really like any of his other songs because he just called it Paul's granny shit, or just Muzak, just crap.
Well, Fall admitted that his songs weren't any good with Wings. Like, he knew he was releasing junk, but I don't think he could do any better. But here's something that is also an issue with the Theodor Adorno theory. So Adorno died in 1969, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right around there. So when Fall stepped in, was he supposedly still writing for the Beatles, but he was old and he couldn't write anymore? Or did Fall decide that he needed to write his own songs? But if he did need to write his own songs, why did he need to work with Mal Evans, the roadie, to write songs? Why didn't he just have Adorno write the songs for him? And are they suggesting that Adorno wrote Rocky Raccoon and Why Don't We Do It in the Road? I mean, like, do you see it? It's like, gets to be absurd, right? So the same guy who wrote Eleanor Rigby also wrote Why Don't We Do It in the Road?
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
No. Well, that's the thing. I mean, if Adorno had, Adorno died in 1969, so if that's the case, I mean, it kind of makes sense because after that, Fall released some just terrible music. I mean, I was looking through on Wikipedia the other night. We actually spoke about this yesterday. That I was going through all the Paul McCartney albums and just looking over the reviews and whatnot. And I'd say out of all the albums, probably one had gotten favorable reviews when it first came out and continued to, which was Band on the Run. And before that, but like you had albums like Red Rose Speedway, Wildlife, McCartney, Ram, Wings at the Speed of Sound, and all these albums. They all just got 1 star, 2 star, maybe 2.5 out of 5. Average at best. Just all these albums are just horrible reviews. They said it was just trite. It was just crap, bland, uninspiring, just weed infused music. And mate, I think there's a couple of retrospective reviews which say that Ram is like the first indie album, or McCartney 2 is the first is a more of a cult album now because of the synth and new wave sound that are brought into the 80s. So a couple of those, and I think some of the later albums they sort of give praise to McCartney because the whole cult of Paulism that, if you dismiss Paul, you're like the worst person on the earth. So there's a lot of reviewers out there saying that you know, Fall's newer albums like Chaos in Creation or Memory Almost Full are really good albums. So I tend to disagree. I think it's just, that's literally granny music right there, but each their own. But the quality of music that Fall released in his solo career didn't really do him any favors. At least someone like John Lennon, when he came out after the Beatles, he released Plastic Ono Band, which I believe is the best Beatles solo album ever made. I just think the lyrics, the melodies, the instrumental, like everything about it is just pretty much spot on. It's probably the perfect album for a solo Beatle. So he was releasing that, and McCartney was releasing Ram, which I've listened to it a few times, especially during the PIA days. Paul is Alive, and it's just a crap album. There's just nothing to it. Uncle Albert at the time was a cool song. I like the changes and everything else, but just the album just did nothing for me. And for solo work, even before I got into Paul is Dead, just never really did it for me. Maybe the early work that he did, some of the songs are pretty good, but there's just nothing to it. So it doesn't really help when nobody wants to work with him either, especially in those early days too. I mean, you got to remember, this is Paul McCartney. I mean, who would ever give up the chance to not work with Paul McCartney? I mean, if you were in the music business, I mean, that'd be the first thing you'd want to do. So I know that a band like Badfinger, they were working, because they were with Apple, they were working with Fall at first. I think Fall wrote, what was the song? Was it Come and Get It? Come and Get It, yeah. He wrote that whole song, and then he gave it to Badfinger, and they released it, and had a bit of success off it. And they're actually really good band, Badfinger. They had a bit of a tragic history, and Ford did nothing to help them out. He sort of just left them out in the dark. And I'm glad that a band like Badfinger sort of gotten the notoriety that they have now, because one of their songs, Without You, was a big hit back in the 70s. I think you might know that song. I think it's by Harry Nilsson, I believe, Without You. It was a big hit. I think Mariah Carey did a cover version of that as well in the 90s. I'm pretty sure you've heard of that song as well. What else did they release? Baby Blue. I don't know if you watched Breaking Bad.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. No, I watched one episode. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. Well, basically, the last scene. There's the song Baby Blue in there, which gave Badfinger the credit that they deserve. So back in the 60s, wrote that song for them, and they got successful. But anyway, so who would pass up the opportunity to not work with Paul McCartney? And it just made me think, well, for people knew in the industry that Paul wasn't Paul, so
right.
They probably just thought, okay, well, we're not going to work with him because you're not the real guy. Like who is this guy? We don't know anything about him. So he ended up working with Linda McCartney, who she had no talent whatsoever, and she just I don't know what foreseen in her musically, but I think she just wanted to be with him, or he wanted to be with her all the time. So that's another thing. Unless you have something else to say, we can move on, or I'll let you finish off.
Well, no, I think you're making a good point that Fall was desperate to work with John again, and he wanted to work with George, and George absolutely refused. He said he ran out of good songs of his own. So that's a big hit, because I think Paul did mind Paul's notes and recordings, and anything that was halfway decent was probably something that started with Paul, like Maybe I'm Amazed, or Hey Jude, whatever that was pretty good was probably Paul's.
Yeah, definitely.
But then, he wanted to work with people. He ended up having to work with Mal Evans And he didn't give Mal Evans the credit he deserves, you know, because he's just a cheapskate guy.
Yeah.
And but you know, eventually, I guess Elvis Costello worked with him, and Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson. But
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you know, people didn't want to work with him when he was desperate to work with people. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's an open secret in showbiz that people know it's not the real Paul.
Yeah. Yeah.
How could they not know?
Definitely. And I think in terms of having a muse as your to inspire you with your songwriting. Obviously, Paul had Linda, which brings me on to the next topic in terms of Jane Asher. Um, Jane Asher was Paul McCartney's girlfriend from 1963 to 1968. So she was basically there throughout all the Beatlemania. She was a couple of years younger than Paul, but she'd already been a well-known actress in the British scene. She did a lot of plays. Um, she was quite a talented actress, and Paul was madly in love with her, and he attended all her plays. They were very cultural together. They did a lot of stuff. They were just a happy, normal young couple, and I think Paul was very lucky to have her because she was a beautiful woman, and she was definitely one of those people who would inspire Paul to write a lot of good love songs. I think I'm Looking Through You was inspired by her, I believe, as well. And a couple of other songs that he wrote was in relation to his relationship to her. Now, after the death of Paul in 1966, things started to change. If you see photos of Jane, even video, she does not look happy at all. Obviously Paul was just towering over her
Mm-hmm.
in terms of height. He just,
Mm-hmm.
you look at, there's one famous photo comp where it has Paul next to Jane, and they're basically the same height. They just they're literally exactly the same. But then there's one photo of him where they both like got their back turned to the camera and they both turn around, and Four's just towering over her. And I think, obviously for Jane, she kind of maybe had no choice but to sort of, continue the charade and, keep things going just so people don't really speak out or try and reveal what is going on and know the truth. But, for those couple of years, Jane looked very depressed. She just wasn't herself. And even though they tried to go to India and, try and, maybe try and come together and bond a bit more, we all know that the engagement was a sham. And even Paul said that he didn't want to marry. He didn't want to get married. He said he'd marry Jane someday, but he didn't want to. And
He'd
so
probably marry her, yeah. Probably.
yeah, he'd probably marry her. So, so with that, I think Jane Asher, she'd love to speak out about it all, but she probably just doesn't want to. And all the Beatles, in their Beatlemania days, they all married English women. They all married just women that they could have a national patriotic connection with them. And then obviously afterwards they married people that were from different countries, which is John was with Yoko and Paul's with Linda. She's American, and she tries to put on that phony English accent, which is just absolutely horrible. I'm like, oh my god, how cringe do you have to be? But what do you think in terms of Jane Asher? Do you think that because she doesn't really talk about it anymore? Do you think that she'll come out with something, or do you think that she'll just just leave, keep it a secret until she dies?
Oh, I doubt that she would be able to say anything. Obviously she knew that Paul had been switched off because there was a big height difference. At least, well, Paul has a good 2 or 3 inches on Paul.
Yeah.
So, she had to go along with it to be just part of the show. Like, oh, it's the same Paul. Look, he has the same girl.
Charlie.
And she.
Good morning. Wake up.
And okay.
Oh God.
Okay, so
Sorry, I got interrupted. I just had someone come over, but no, it's all good now. All good.
okay,
Please pardon me.
yeah, no, just cut that part out. But okay, so Jane was an actress, so obviously she could pretend, but she never seemed happy with Fall. And I do tend to think that Fall was together with Linda before he ever became, Paul.
Yes.
And because, Jane, there was the engagement party, and when Jay Marks was saying, well, why is Paul hanging out with that girl with the camera? And one of the journalists was like, oh, well, that's the other McCartney.
What do you mean, other McCartney?
It's all very hush hush. But yeah, so Paul ignored Jane at the engagement party, and then he marries Linda in '69, and then Jane never talks about Paul again, and all of her novels are about loss and trauma and horrible love affairs. And so I think that's her cathartic way of working through the trauma of what happened. But I don't think she'd be able to ever talk about it. I mean, even if she did something like Heather Mills with giving evidence to a lawyer to come out after she dies, well, they're still children, they're still family members. Like, these people can be harmed after, if it ever did come out. So I just don't think they would dare.
No.
And people seem to think that Fall is gonna spill the beans one day, but
no, he won't.
I mean, other than his little quips when he kind of tells people what's going on, like, oh, Shay 1965, that was before my time, or I'm
that
not
was,
the
yeah. That was
yeah
that was in my own home country. He said that.
yeah, that was in your neck of the woods, Brisbane. So other than that, I don't think there's going to be any revelation. I mean, I wouldn't hold my breath, but
well, that's the thing, but he wouldn't be able to do that because his kids' lives are at stake if that was the case, and his grandkids. A lot of generations would have to sort of deal with it. But the thing is with Paul, I should say, is that after he dies, there's no one really to carry on that legacy for him. I mean, you got Stella, who's a fashion designer, but the fashion's kind of mediocre anyway, so it's not great. So
it runs in the family, mediocrity. And James, oh my God, James would wish he could be mediocre.
James is just horrible. I don't know what's going on there. I think obviously he knows what's going on. He's just really saddened by everything that's happened because I think James might even be a secret PID truther. So James, if you're listening, how are you?
Yeah, I'm sure he's listening to this.
Oh yeah, definitely. But yeah, James, like I don't know what the go is with him. He's just always just seems very depressed. He just doesn't seem like a really happy-go-lucky person. And yeah, especially when you're the son of the supposed biggest musician in the world. Why are you? Why aren't you? Trying to at least instill some sort of legacy, to try to continue on the legacy of being Paul McCartney's son, and actually go out and release some good music and whatnot. But like you said, I mean, he wishes he was mediocre because he's pretty terrible. Mm-hmm. And then, obviously the other kids do their own thing. But, so there's not really any sort of musical legacy to keep it going with Four. So... I don't know where it's going to come from in the end. So I think that once Paul dies, I think the revelation will sort of come to light.
I'm afraid that when Paul dies, that Paul is going to die with him.
Yeah.
And that's depressing to me because then it'll seem like it's too late then. Like he's dead. It's done. Like
Yeah.
right now, it still seems relevant because Paul is alive. I'm just worried. I'll be sad if Paul just disappears and is buried along with Paul.
He will be. He definitely will be. I mean, and the thing is that there's been a lot of videos in terms of like different doubles. You got 5'4", 5-toe fall and 6-toe fall, and you got different. You got like a few doubles that have played the role. So who knows how long or how many doubles have been used since 4 has since the 4 thing has been going on for. One thing that I do agree with in terms of memoirs and also, or not so much memoirs, but Mike Williams' research is that he said that there have been multiple fours that have come in and played different parts. There's been a street four, there's been a studio four, and whatnot. And I think when I look at like those like different photos and that, I do see a couple of differences in terms of using different types of fours for different types of situations. I don't agree with 4 being Vivian Stanshall. I think that's just kind of that's just made up. But I do think that there have been